experience in conferences, I found that the best thing to do is just start talking, and then we'll stop talking. Okay, let's move right now into Las Cruces, where we have Dr. Vincent Gutschik, who has been responsible for setting up the program in Las Cruces, as well as his talk, and I believe John Nelson is going to introduce him. Is that right?
Hello from Las Cruces. Vince Gutschik is our next speaker. He's a career researcher and teacher. He's been focusing on, over the past 3 decades, on ecophysiology of plants and the response to climate change, which you're going to hear some about today. He has a BS in chemistry from Notre Dame and a PhD in chemistry from Caltech. He moved in stages to biology from physiochemical side with theory, computer modeling, lab experience, and field work. He did a short postdoc at Berkeley and a term as Gibbs Fellow at Yale, which brought him to New Mexico. He worked for 10 years at Los Alamos, where he met his wife, Dr. Llewellyn Kay. And after Los Alamos, he spent 22.5 years at New Mexico State University. He has since retired from MSU and has co-founded a nonprofit private school, the Las Cruces Academy, where he's currently a board chair, teacher, and business planner. Welcome, Vince Gutschik.
Thanks for that great introduction, John. Let me get started right away with the presentation. Okay, my job is to see if I can impart some of what I've learned and what other people have learned about the biological effects of climate change. By the way, on the right-hand part of the screen, that's some of the work we did on 80-foot boom lifts in the forest. And I used to have a fear of heights. Okay, this is, as I say, like really 40 years of study. And I've looked at all the linkages from greenhouse gases to temperature, precipitation, then physiological effects, ecological effects, and so on. The links are many and complicated, but they're all understandable. I just want to hit some of the key points. So first, we obviously get directly impacted by the warming. So we have physiological heat stress from the extreme events. This is a picture from the 2003 heat wave in France, where 30,000 excess deaths were recorded. Llewellyn and I were there, and it was hot. Another thing that happens with extremes of precipitation is you get floods. This is from Bangladesh. If you look at the global map, you'll see places with more extremes on the high side, more extremes on the low side. So it's not just the means that matter, it's the extremes, as Todd Ringler was saying. Okay, the other thing it affects is our usable water supplies, drinking water, M&I, which is municipal and industrial. Okay, so the effects are highly regionalized, and there's maps all over about this. But what happens, as Dave Gutzler said, is that we're changing the precipitation here. Now, 25% of the Rio Grande flow is precipitation in New Mexico. The big thing is snowpack up in Colorado. But anyway, the southwest monsoon is drying up, and there's predictions that by 2100 it will be 40% lower. A much bigger regional effect is the shift of the intertropical convergence zone. Okay, that's a band of strong solar radiation, strong evaporation into the atmosphere from the oceans, and rainfall. Right now, it's centered a little bit north of the equator. When it was colder, it was on the equator. As the climate warms, it keeps going further and further north. Here's the big problem. Indonesia is under it now, and they rely on that precipitation for triple cropping to support 200 million people. When the band moves far enough, they get single cropping. Where do you put 2/3 of 200 million people? So we're talking a big deal about climate migrants. Okay, the food supply is affected in many different ways. It's pretty clear that when you change temperature and precipitation, what's suitable for certain crops now isn't suitable, say you move poleward. Whoops, we're a little bit high there. And the other thing is that plants, unlike we, have a direct response to CO2 at these hundreds of parts per million level, because CO2 is the substrate for photosynthesis. Oh no, don't do that to me. Go away. Edge, go away. Oh. Edge, I hate you. Oh, I can't get out of it. Shoo, okay. All right, so plants alter their growth in shape, speed of development, and all of their internal anatomy. I'm in a study right now with people from China, UC Davis, Harvard, and University of Illinois that looked at how all these things change at once. The picture isn't clear yet, but all of these changes have been observed separately. Another thing that happens is with higher temperatures, there's more driving force to push water vapor out of the leaves, increasing water use by the plants. But at the same time, there's a direct response of these pores in the leaves, the stomata, to close down some more. And the net effect is pretty much of a wash on the average, but not for individual species. So this competitive status will change for basically all vegetation. That includes crop versus weeds and so on, things that really affect us. Plants change their nutrient content. It goes lower. I've done a number of studies on this. If CO2 rises, the photosynthetic proteins become more efficient. And so the plants cut back their investment in that. So that affects us because the protein content goes down. That's a picture of bread. Bread wheat breeders are having a tough time. They have to keep protein at 18% to make bread. And they're constantly struggling to find more genetic variation to keep that up as CO2 rises. Direct effects of heat stress on the plants. China had been seeing for 15 years or so a rise in rice yield, but it's come down a bit now because the high temperature extremes are sterilizing some of the rice pollen. So, and then there's just offsets in the ecological system. You better have the pollinators ready when the plant is blooming. You better see what happens when the pests and diseases are going to hit vulnerable times of the plant development. So lots of interesting phenomena here. Some cases it's a good shift, in other cases it's not. And then droughts and wildfires. Actually, let's say if you have higher temperatures, you might have a little higher water use by trees. You also don't have the snowpack to sustain their soil water content. And you also get extreme droughts during the summer growing season. So there's one prediction that by 2100, we're not going to have any forests in the western US. That's a pretty daunting prospect. Okay, let me hide this guy. Hide the video panel. Okay, go away. Well, I tried. All right. Anyway, agriculture is adapted to our current climate in every place in the world. We have some places with good yields, excess yields, supporting the rest of the world, but there are going to be some significant shifts. Basically, you can take a climate envelope and say what range of temperatures and precipitation will support a given species. There's more complicated things because you're depending upon the other ecological partners. That's even seen in the ocean. Yeah, actually more dramatically. The little blurbs here are where new species migrations have come in. And actually look here on the North Atlantic coast of the US, we're seeing tropical lionfish. Very interesting. By the way, they're very poisonous. Okay, and this is a terrifying prospect of English wine. I hope there's no English heritage people here. Some of the varieties of wine grapes in southern France have had to move north, and some of them had to move out of France. Okay, and then the oceans see some direct effects. Besides the overall warming, there is bleaching. The coral reefs are much more susceptible to bleaching at higher temperatures, and 2/3 of the Australian Great Barrier Reef has already been hit with bleaching. The other thing that happens is organisms that make carbonate skeletons out of this form called aragonite find it more difficult to make that aragonite precipitate instead of staying dissolved. And that's been seen in a number of organisms. And remember, coral reefs are breeding grounds for about 4,000 species of fish, some of which are commercially very important. And 1 billion people depend on fish from the ocean for their protein. Okay, disease vectors are another big thing hitting us directly. The regions where, say, mosquitoes that carry tropical diseases can exist has moved poleward. Dengue, malaria, and everything are at our border. Japanese equine encephalitis is here. West Nile is here. Chikungunya is coming. Zika is coming. All scary. All right. And then people have brought in mosquitoes that are very problematic because, in particular, they're day biting. In 1950, Farmington, New Mexico was the last place in the United States that had endemic malaria, and it was cut off the transmission cycle because people put up screens on their windows. Get rid of the night biting mosquitoes and you're fine. But now we have day biting mosquitoes, and here are some places where they're moving. You go from red to green to yellow, where they're going to be found. We already have the mosquitoes that can carry malaria. It hasn't become endemic, but it's not just malaria. Here's a plot of 19 different emerging diseases, many of them viral. And you know, viral diseases are exceptionally difficult to treat. And 8 of those are in the Americas. And what do we do about control? Well, as I said, window screens worked before. What do we do to control the mosquitoes themselves? That's a little hard because a lot of them are resistant to pesticides. And treating the malarial parasite or other parasites themselves is hard. There's now strains of malaria in Cambodia and southern Vietnam that are resistant to all antimalarial treatments. And they haven't spread yet, but we don't know what's going to happen. Yeah, that's a map. Look at, that's the original extent of malaria in the United States. So the malarial swamp wasn't just in DC, it was everywhere. Okay. We're also changing biodiversity. And that's all the wild plants, animals, fungi, protists that we use, that we appreciate. It has intrinsic value. And in addition, it's critical for us at certain points, like crop breeders need genes to add resistance to new pests and diseases. And GMO aside, they only contribute a few genes. We don't know the thousands and thousands of genes that are going to be needed to combat all these emerging pests and diseases. So we don't want to lose them, but one of the problems is as geographic regions or biogeographic regions move, they don't all move at the same time for this species, this species. So you can get to the point where the species can't, that's where its pollinators are, or it goes into a place where there's more pests and diseases. So we are losing lots of species, and we know that. They're moving, you know, here's some data about how far some of them have moved. 100 kilometers, that's not too much, but it keeps on accelerating. So I already mentioned this part about crop breeding. So what do we do to deal with the situation? One thing is adaptation. ameliorating the effects that are already here and that are coming. Right? We can do that genetically if we have enough genetic diversity. Doesn't work well for some plants because you need to have variant genes, alleles, that respond correctly or adaptively to high CO2. And those genes were here 20 million years ago, and they've probably been lost by genetic drift. So for us, can we adapt? Well, for something with our lifespan and reproductive time, it takes thousands of years to adapt. So it's not going to happen for us. The technological solutions, the practical solutions, if technology got us in here, can it get us out? Not by itself. I mean, that's how we got here. Everything has side effects. So what is best to do is to get to that first link between greenhouse gases and changes in temperature, thus precipitation, and all these other cascading effects. Greenhouse gas emissions are the top link there. Maybe some organisms aren't particularly upset by that if we don't make the solution. So what can we do? Pacala and Sokolow published a paper, I believe it was 2003, 2004, about climate wedges. These are individual, oops, no way, changes that we can make in the way we operate as a species that will decrease the emissions and the effects. So let's say there's an arbitrary scale here, 7 wedges, some people have 14, and so on. It could be increased efficiency of transportation, increased energy efficiency of lighting and heating, changing over to renewable resources, add them all together, because there's no magic bullet. There's no one wedge that can solve it. So we have to learn about all of these and see how they coordinate. And well, Clay Doyle's here, he's from the utility. Don't hide. I made a comment to him, like, if you say, okay, we can live without fossil fuels, but we can't live without water. Well, right now we can't live without fossil fuels. They support about 2/3 of the world's population just to get food on the table. So we've got to make a very integrated solution to all this stuff. And that's what we've got to learn about. That's a huge challenge. Some of the solutions are market-based, which is, say, the Citizens Climate Lobby deal. Tax carbon at the source, and then redistribute the money collected to the people who, well, the whole population, and say 60% of them are at break even or a little better. But the whole thing forces the market to go to low carbon solutions. So that's one of the wedges, and we can all look at that. But the real thing we want to do is learn how to work together, learn all these pieces of the solution, and educate ourselves, and then educate our decision makers. You know, it's been said that when the people lead, the leaders will follow. Okay. And that's where I'll stop. I'd like to thank SWEC for hosting us, and John Nelson, my co-organizer here, and so many people in CCL at all these other sites, and even outside of New Mexico, and people who helped us with publicity. So thank you very much.